We are here with Spencer Hutchings, who is running for the Idaho House of Representatives in District 1, Seat A. So, yeah, without any ado, can you tell us about yourself? What's your background? What was your journey getting to this point now where you're standing for public office?
Well, I'm originally from California. I was born in the Central Valley and grew up outside Yosemite National Park, which is why when that place went crazy, we found another place that was like it, that reminded us of it, and we moved there. So that's how we ended up in Sandpoint up in North Idaho. And I went to Marine Corps right out of high school, worked on jet engines, was a flight mechanic, flew around Southeast Asia, got to do all kinds of fun and interesting things. And when I got out of the service, I started a series of businesses and ended up here with a gun store up here. I had a larger gun store in California. This gun store is small on purpose. It's kind of almost like a semi-retirement thing, but I enjoy selling guns. I used to build hospitals for a time. I built hospitals. And the people that used to know me when I built hospitals, they always wonder why I do guns. And I tell them it's far more ethical than building hospitals. Um, uh, I was in the Republican Party up here. I've been in the Republican Party up here for quite some time, active in the Republican Central Committee. And I just started to run for this office last session when they redistricted Heather Scott out of it. And it was a five-way race. And Mark Sauter ended up in it because, we've got Sandpoint here. And the Sandpoint residents do what liberal people do in North Idaho, which is they register as Republicans and they go vote for the worst Republican on the ticket, which was Mark Sauter. So he made it by 723 votes and hoping to correct that mistake this time around. Kind of wish that Idaho had a primary runoff system because he only got, I think, 37% or 36% of the vote, and I got 33. It was a 723 vote margin. So if we had a runoff system, I'd have won easily. But we don't. So here we are 2 years later trying to correct that mistake.
Well, that leads into another question. You had a five-way race there, and now you have a three-way race. It's never easy, is it? So, what are the challenges that you had then, and what are the challenges you have now in just getting your message out?
It's just getting in front of people. I mean, I've never gotten in front of a group of people where I wasn't well received when they heard the message that I have, which is, the message every Republican should have, which is we need a smaller government and we need less taxes and we need more freedom and more liberty. And whoever you hire as a representative should be working towards those goals. And that message resonates well up here. Every time I, go to any of these events, like we were up in Boundary last week, and a middle school basketball court full of, or basketball arena full of folks, and it went over great. Jane and Mark Sauter were both there. Those are the two people I'm running against, and there's just a stark contrast between their ideas and my ideas of what a conservative representative should be.
What are your ideas? I mean, obviously you say somebody who supports, more liberty, lower taxes, smaller government. But can you elaborate on that? Because everybody comes and claims that they're for smaller government and more liberty, but what does that actually mean?
So it's pretty. Idaho makes a perfect example for you. Every couple of years, Idaho does this, and it just makes it so easy to talk to normal people about grocery tax. Every couple of years, they trot out the grocery tax. They hang it in front of you like a carrot, and everybody runs towards it. But what they've never told us, I don't know if you've ever heard them say it, but I've never heard them say, when the grocery tax is gone, what part of the government are they going to eliminate that used to fund? And the answer is nothing. They're not going to eliminate any part of the government that funds. So they're not actually eliminating the tax. They're just shifting it around. And that's a game they've played forever. They don't actually get rid of a tax. They just move it. They'll move it to property owners or to some other type of tax, some other fee. But the tax never goes away and the government never shrinks. And what I want to do is actually shrink the government. Idaho has, I think last time I counted, it's like 190 or so departments. We've got the barley group or the barley coalition, the wheat, the grape, bean, potato. And these are all great endeavors, that these guys need to, market their crops and get their crops sold. But why does the government have to be involved? What is our role in them selling their product? If we're going to have all these groups, Sandpoint has Lighthouse Foods. They make salad dressing. Do we need a salad dressing council to help them sell their salad dressing? These things, I think these parts of the government can be eliminated and we can save some money and people can pay less in taxes.
So how do you actually eliminate parts of government? I've been watching the legislature now for 2 years, and people talk about just cutting government in general, but then when each department comes up with their budget, there's defenders of it. They say, well, this is very important. We've got to give them the funds they need to do their job. And every single department has one of those, advocates, and they argue for it on the floor. And
Right.
this year the budget only went up a little bit because some of the federal funds came off the appropriations. So that's good, but it's still going up because they start with last year's budget as a baseline and then add onto it. How do you actually go back and reduce it or eliminate entire departments? How do you find a critical mass of people in the legislature to do that?
Well, what I'd like to do is go through some of the low hanging fruit that are in that list of departments. Hopefully we can find one or two things that we can get multiple people to agree. Maybe the government doesn't need to be involved in that, and I don't know which ones those are. I don't know if it's one of these ones I already mentioned or if it's something entirely different. But the goal would be to find something that multiple people can agree, yeah, we can probably get rid of that and it's not going to hurt anybody and it's going to save us money. So that would be where I'd want to start.
Yeah. I remember talking to one of our Ada County commissioners down here. He worked in the Reagan White House, and he told me a story of a World War II era program. I don't remember what the specific program was, but once the war was over, it was obsolete. However, the program continued, and it took a couple million every year to operate and do who knows what with. And he talked about how it took years within the Reagan White House to get that executive branch program shut down. It's, what is the saying that there's the only thing on earth close to immortality is a government program. So
Temporary government.
yeah, temporary government program. That's it. It's they all get started and then it's hard to unwind. So I mean,
Yeah, no, and it's all like that. These people are really, really attached to these jobs, and they've lost the concept of public servant. You know, I see a lot of these jobs like the launch program that they just started is a great example. If you go look at the budget for that department, they budgeted what amounts to $100,000 per employee for salary, and that doesn't include benefits. $100,000 per employee. Well, we have a state where the average income is like 50 grand, and in some counties it's less than that. So we have people making $30,000, $50,000 a year, funding people making $100,000 a year, and we're funding these people to give away more of our money. And at some point, this has to stop. At some point, I'm hoping we can make sense to people that we're spending your money unnecessarily. I mean, you got to remember, what was the Boston Tea Party over? It was 1%. Tea tax was going from 2% to 3%. And we were throwing stuff into the harbor over that. And these days, if you're a person who's making, a decent amount of money and you don't have enough tax breaks or, deductions, you could be paying 50% in taxes by the time you're done, by the time you pay gas tax and sales tax and income tax and property tax. They could be digging you for 50%. And they've done it for so long that they've just got us used to it and people just seem to accept it. Well, maybe we need to start teaching people that's not acceptable and it's not necessary. And perhaps the government servants don't need the finest benefits and the best salaries in their fields.
Yep, I can see a little bit on both sides of that. Obviously, if you want something done right, you need to hire good people, and if you're going to hire good people, you need to pay them, at least commensurately to the rest of their industry. But I'm sure, you and I and most everyone else would agree that there is a lot of stuff in government that they shouldn't even be doing, and so that's that's where I would start. Like you said, the low hanging fruit that everybody agrees is not really the function of government.
Right. And you can even go to I love going after administrative stuff, because administrators didn't used to make the kind of money that they make now, because the pay of CEOs in large corporations has gone astronomically high, far, far higher than ever in history, based on, what a CEO makes versus what a normal employee in the company makes. It used to be 20, 30 times what a normal employee in the company made. And now it's 20, 30,000 times what a normal employee in a company makes. Well, that's kind of flowed over to the civilian sector. And we have, average sized school district superintendents making $250,000 a year. I don't see how that's justifiable. And I'm not saying cut the school budgets that much. I'm saying, why don't you take that guy's money and pay the underpaid teachers with it? I mean, why does the school administrator need $250,000 a year? What value are they adding for that amount of money?
So your background, built hospitals, you've run some gun stores, so you've managed people, you've, managed businesses.
Mm-hmm.
How do you take that experience and apply it to legislation?
Well, it's relationships, especially building the hospitals. You want to talk about an interesting group of people, doctors, lawyers, administrators, staff, having to work with every level of person, having to work with unions. You get a pretty broad experience, and I didn't just have gun stores. I've owned computer networking stores too, where we built computer networks. We worked on the IRS network in Fresno, in Central California, in Fresno. So I've done a lot of other stuff. I've had just a vast array of experience with different types of people, from the lowest to the highest on the, I don't know, the food chain, I guess. And it's given me the ability to usually sit down with just about anybody. If we have some sort of goal we're trying to work towards, like trying to reduce the size of the government, trying to pick a department we can get rid of, usually we can sit down and reach some kind of understanding, even with the Democrat types who are, so vehemently against any reduction in government. There's got to be something where they would be willing to give a little bit, if they're going to be honest in their discussions, in their negotiations. And they may not be. Maybe we have to do it without their help. Maybe we just do it with Republicans and we just run over the Democrats that are there. But I would like to get them to agree too. I would like to think that paying less taxes is good for everybody. Why wouldn't the Democrats like to pay less taxes?
Well, I guess that's a rhetorical question, but
Yeah.
um, you bring up a point that with a Republican supermajority, if you had, every Republican was solidly conservative and had, conservative principles and a plan for how to implement them, wouldn't matter what the Democrats wanted because there'd be enough Republicans to do anything, even, override vetoes. But that doesn't seem to happen. It seems, pulling teeth just to get a library bill passed. Uh, even tax cuts are hard to get through. But then other things like 6 months of contraception for insurance providers. That's a Democrat bill that pretty well sailed through the legislature. Uh, Conservatives voted against it, but there was enough, you know, coalition between the Democrats and people in the Republican Party that they were able to get it through. It seems backwards. It sometimes feels like we're in a purple state, not a solid red state. Why do you think that is, and how could you work to change that in the legislature?
Well, I say this all the time. We have Republicans who are not Republicans. There's all kinds of names people call them. I like calling them rhinos. That's one thing. The shorthand. It's Republican in name only, but the shorthand for that is they're just liars. They sign up to be Republicans. They put the R next to their name, but then they go vote with the Democrats because they're running in districts where it's majority Republican and they'll never get elected if they put a D next to their name. So they put an R next to their name and then they go down to Boise and they just do whatever they want to do. They act like a Democrat. The Sauter, the guy I'm running against, I mean, he's one of those guys. He had the nerve to say that he voted with the Republicans. And yeah, he voted with the Republicans 50% of the time. If you're voting with the Republicans 50% of the time, you're not a Republican. I mean, at best, you're a uniparty person. But I mean, uniparty with somebody who's voting with the Republicans half the time is even being a little kind. I mean, he's practically a Democrat, but he doesn't have the honesty to say he's a Democrat. I mean, if you look at the overall makeup of the state house, I saw a really neat diagram somebody did with how people are registered, what they identify as. That's starting to be funny to me. They identify as Republican, but their pronouns are, grifter and rhino. These people identify as Republican, but when you look at their voting record and you put a letter next to their name based on their voting record, they're Democrats, and I think the last chart that I saw was about 50-50. I don't know if you've seen that chart.
Mhm. Yeah, actually, a friend of mine made that based on the data from the Institute for Legislative Analysis. They compared a selection of votes against the Idaho Republican Party platform. And yeah, it's not really 80-20 as it looks like on paper. It's closer to 50-50 if you look at it purely by ideology and by how people are voting, which I
Yeah.
guess explains why it feels like we're in a purple state, because maybe we are. But I
Yeah.
don't
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I don't think the voters are that divided. So what how do voters keep getting fooled? And why do they continue to get fooled and elect people who don't actually align with their values?
Well, it's like I just said, these rhino people are liars. They just lie to the voters. They tell the voters one thing and then get in office and do something else. I mean, I go up on stages at forums with these people, and I know how they actually do things in real life. I mean, it doesn't matter what you say. What matters is what you do. And what these people say and what they do are two different things. And the way I look at that is if you say one thing and do another thing, you're a liar. And, I think that's why a lot of people in the state, I think that's why a lot of voters, actually around the country, are kind of disconnected from this stuff because who wants to go participate in something where you're going to get lied to? I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't want to go to some meeting and have some guy talk to me for an hour, and it turns out everything he said was a lie. Well, I think that's been going on for a while, and I think it's made people very disinterested in this stuff because they just don't want that in their life. And I'm trying to go completely the other direction and just be utterly honest about everything. And I'm not trying, I am doing it. I am being utterly honest about everything, good, bad, ugly, indifferent. I have to be honest because I want to try and push it the other direction. We've been getting pushed to the left so hard, we've got to push back to the right. And part of that's being honest.
So what else does it take to push us back to the right? I was just writing this morning about how our culture really is pushing leftward at an alarming rate, and everything that we once considered either conservative or neutral institutions in our country are being turned leftist. And how do you stop that? How do you reverse that? It seems like trying to hold back the tide. It seems overwhelming.
Well, one of the things that the left seems to have on us is a virtually unlimited supply of money. We have in this town here in Sandpoint, we actually had a person who was installed in the county. This is a leftist organizer, a Democrat person who did a lot of effective work in Montana. And they took this person and they moved him to Sandpoint. And we never did figure out where the money came from that they did this with, but they spent somewhere between $1 and $3 million setting up a business for this person to run. Then they installed this person in the local chamber of commerce. Then this person took the business that they run, which is a brewery, and they started doing daycare there during the daytime. Because I mean, that's what you do with a brewery during the day, right? You run childcare. So we have a leftist installed with some kind of outside money to influence the politics in the area, and they're being very effective at it. They're running, LGBT stuff out of this brewery, and they're having little parades, and now they spread their way up to Boundary. So when they're throwing that much money at us, we've got to be able to push back with some money of our own. And I don't know if there's just no willingness, or sorry, my phone's ringing. I don't know if there's just no willingness on the right to do that or not. I mean, it doesn't seem like we get the money injected into us that these leftists get injected into their campaigns. I mean, the Rhino guys, if you look at their funding when they go run for an office, they get money dumped on them by corporations. And I've got to fund my campaign with small donations from individual people. I'm not getting $1,000 per donor like these guys are from corporations. I'm getting 25, 50, $100 from people. And that's what I have to fight with. And until we get people with deep pockets on the right that are willing to put their money where their mouth is, we're going to keep slipping to the left, I think.
Yeah. For viewers watching, if you go to the primary pulse at gemstatechronicle.com, you can click on the sunshine report for each candidate, and see how much money they've been given, how much comes from people, how much comes from corporations, how much is in state, how much is out of state. It's a pretty cool system. And if you look at it, Spencer Hutchings has gotten just about $3,600, all from people. Jane Sauter has gotten 4,000, all from people, whereas Representative Mark Sauter has gotten looks like about 21,000, and two-thirds of that comes from companies. So, it is what it is. Um,
Right.
and that's something people should definitely take in mind. Who's supporting each candidate? Is it your neighbors and your friends? Is it your members of the community, or is it you know, the interests, the special interests, the wealthy interests, the corporate interests? And that's not to say that they are not allowed to have a voice in things, but it does seem to tilt the scales a little bit.
Yeah, well, they're paying for the vote. They're paying for the politician that's going to do their bidding. You know, the citizens need somebody working for them. We don't need more corporate interests being represented in state government or federal government. We need the people to be represented. It's a government of the people, by the people, for the people, right? Not
Yeah.
by corporations for the corporations.
Well, see, it seems like, left and right have different views. And when I say left and right, I guess, the established power brokers are also in there as well. In that I think most conservatives have an idea that a state representative should just, as you said, represent the people of their district. And so it's their business. But it's almost become a very organized campaign, both on the left and, the uniparty, in that, you were just talking about left-wing groups, wherever they got the money from, are deliberately working to set up an outpost in a red state where they can spread their ideology. And then you have corporations, how many of which are actually present and active necessarily in District 1? A lot of them are just based out here in Boise, and they're looking and say, well, we need statewide, we need more support for this issue or that issue. So we're going to go and give money to somebody from this town who will support our agenda. And it might not have anything to do necessarily with what's going on in your district, but more it's the higher level statewide thing. And it seems to take away from, I think, the ideal of what representative government was supposed to be. You see that
It,
at
it,
the national level too. It's like, yeah, Tim Pool makes the point that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, she's not really representing her constituents in her district so much as she's representing, democratic socialists from throughout the country. It's completely inverting the way representation is supposed to work.
yeah, and when you have corporations that are looking at, we need so many votes to pass legislation that protects us or helps us, and they look at an area like mine where it's relatively cheap for them to buy a seat up here, which is basically what they're doing. They're basically buying a seat, and that's buying them a vote. So, hey, let's get that vote up there. That's a cheap one to buy. We'll buy that one. Or at least that's what it seems to me like they're doing. I mean, I don't know why a lot of those companies that are donating to the corporations that are donating to Sauter, I don't know what they're expecting, a representative from District 1 to do for them, other than just be a vote they can count on. I don't know who tells them to, hey, this is our guy, give this guy money. I don't know where that stuff comes from. Be interesting to find out.
Well, it seems like there are many layers. That's something I've been looking at the last couple of years, between PACs and lobby groups and corporations and associations and, political figures. Um, there's a lot of moving parts, but they all seem to, organize around certain agendas, like the launch grant, for example. That passed the House by one vote and passed the Senate by a couple. And then this year they appropriated money again. And by the time it comes up for its renewal in what I believe 2027, it's just going to be, well, you can't take this away because kids are counting on it. When
Right.
in reality, the way I see it is it's just a direct transfer of taxpayer dollars from taxpayers to corporations and schools. And the students, they're just carrying the money on behalf of the powers.
Yeah, these big companies just figured out a way to force all the regular taxpayers in the state of Idaho to train their workers
Hmm.
for free. Or it doesn't cost them anything. It costs us money, but it doesn't cost those corporations anything. And that's it's not fair to the common person. It's not fair to the average citizen that they're being forced to give up their money to hire or to train a worker for a very large corporation who could very well do it themselves and could afford to do it themselves. They just don't want to, and they figured out how to make us do it for them. So they're taking advantage.
I guess it's just the bottom line. They look at the numbers and say, well, if we invest this much in the political process, PACs and lobbyists and donations to politicians, then we can get this much back and save a few bucks. And
Yeah. And buy a bigger yacht, or get a bigger mansion. I mean, I don't know. When I used to do the hospital stuff, I made a lot of money. And there was just a point in my life where I realized it didn't matter how much money I made and how many toys I bought. It isn't what made me happy. My family makes me happy. And taking time with my family and doing things that we enjoy to do makes me happy. But, eating at fancy restaurants and buying fancy cars, that doesn't give me happiness.
I wonder, and this is completely apropos of nothing. I wonder if it's the happiness people think that those things will bring happiness themselves, or if it's kind of a status thing that look what I can afford, look what I can do. I can go hang out with the other rich people. I don't know. It's
Yeah,
it's
and
it's a
that's
world I'm not familiar with.
yeah, and it's kind of pathetic to me that people get that way. You know, who cares what other people think of you? I get up every morning and I look in the mirror. I don't get up every morning and look at, a bunch of people that I'm trying to impress. I want to be happy with myself, and I want my wife to be happy that she's married to me. We yesterday was our 28th anniversary. We've been together
Congratulations.
for a long time. Yeah, thank you. And we're best friends. And what's important to me is that she's happy and I'm happy and that we're happy together. What does money have to do with that other than being able to, keep the lights on in the house? I mean, other than much more than that. And it seems excess to me. And, I feel silly saying that. I feel kind of like a commie when I say stuff like that. Because it's like, I don't know. It just the wealth stuff doesn't mean as much to me. And maybe I'm fortunate because I had a point in my life where I had a bunch of stuff and I just realized, it's nice, but it's not worth the sacrifice that I have to do, personally to have this stuff. I'm happier when I am not making those sacrifices and making less money.
Well, that's all life is. It's just you're deciding what are your priorities, what are the trade-offs, what's the opportunity cost for everything you do, and you've got to make that decision. It's not a zero sum, binary thing.
Right.
So you mentioned being happy doing other things. What are some of the things you enjoy doing when you're not campaigning or running a gun store?
Uh, my wife and I used to race cars. We used to be quite outdoorsy. Did four-wheel drive trucks. Actually, I was running just a few minutes late this morning because I took my old rock crawler truck to the office this morning because I hadn't driven it in a while. I just felt like driving it. Got about halfway here and realized there was no gas in it. So we used to rock crawling. We did racing. Of course, we did shooting competitions. Three-gun competitions, USPSA, like simulated combat type stuff. My wife really loves doing Steel Challenge, which is basically speed shooting. We have a farm. We raise a very interesting kind of pig, Mason pigs. We have ducks and geese and chickens and dogs. We raise Czechoslovakian shepherds. We'll have a litter of Czech shepherds every couple of years. That's mainly what we do. Work around the farm. I have about 60 acres, so we have a pretty good sized forest, and have a sawmill, and I cut my trees down and turn them into lumber and build stuff with them. So I have lots of cool little hobbies, and it's peaceful, and there's nothing quite as peaceful as walking around out in the forest and picking morels or picking some other kind of mushroom and finding cool plants. I mean, it's fun. It's enjoyable. It's a good life.
Yeah, sounds like the dream to me. I don't know about anyone else if that would make them happy, but that sounds about ideal for where I want to be in 10 or 15 years. But nevertheless, if you win this, then you're going to be spending 3 months of the year down in Boise. You're going to be having to spend the rest of the time, on the trail, basically all the time, traveling to events, talking to constituents, you know, getting ready for the next session. You know, do you think that's worth the sacrifice?
Well, I do, and I think somebody has to do it. And what led me originally to decide to do this was having Heather Scott as a representative and knowing her quite well and knowing the kind of person she was and how well she represented us. I mean, she's probably the only politician I've ever known in my life who's never lied to me. I mean, not as far as I know. I don't think she's ever lied to me. she's a good person. And when they redistricted her out of District 1, and we were left with the choices we were at that time, I didn't think any of them were going to be the type of person that Heather was, where they could be honest with people. I mean, that's another reason why I'm so, so determined to just be a truth teller. That's what we had before. That's what the citizens of the district deserve, and that's what I want to give them. I want them to have honesty and transparency in government. And it is going to be a huge inconvenience for me. It's not like this is one of those jobs where I'm going to get rich off of it. I'll probably lose money doing this
Mhm.
job. Actually, I'm already losing money doing it. And $17,000 for 3 months down in Boise, plus all the other time that I have to spend on it, it's a pittance. It's a small amount of money, but I can afford to do that. It'll be okay. And I want to help. I want to help my fellow citizens. Not everybody has the time to invest in doing stuff like this, and I'm able to do it. So I'm going to try and help.
I was at a candidate forum a couple days ago down in Canyon County, and when the question was, how do you decide how to vote on things? Everybody basically answered the same. They said, I'll look to, does it apply to the Constitution? Is it what my constituents want? And, how does it sit with my conscience? They called it the three C's. Uh, that's easy enough to say, and I'm sure everybody will say that. Even the Democrats will say that. So when you're looking at a piece of legislation, especially something that maybe is not, you know, obviously with things like guns, how you're going to vote on those
Right.
taxes, but something that's a little bit tougher one. For example, there was a lot of debate this year over the fentanyl bill. Obviously, something needs to be done. We need to put people who are trafficking fentanyl away, get that off our streets, stop it from coming in our state. But there were questions. Is this giving too much power to prosecutors and police? Is this going to catch up people who maybe are not, should not be in the prison system and, addicts? Is it going to catch them up? And then there were all sorts of questions. So, on the real complicated issues, what's your process for deciding how you're going to come down on an issue?
Well, the initial process, since I'm going to be an amateur at this, is to get counsel from people who've been there a long time and I think share my values. People like Heather and
Mhm.
Scott Herndon and Bill Hart. I'll talk to these people and I'll try and get counsel. And I fully intend to join the Freedom Caucus, and there will be other people there that I can get counsel from. Brian Linney, et cetera. So I want to get counsel from people who've been around, and then have some time to think about it. Hopefully, I would like to have time to actually read the bills. I know the Idaho bills aren't huge, so that shouldn't be a problem. But I'd like to read it, think
There's
about
just
it,
a
get some
lot of them.
counsel. Yeah. And then make the decision that I think is going to work best for the constituents, and that doesn't violate my core morals. And I don't think, as long as I'm sticking with what the Freedom Caucus is doing, I watched what they did this session, and I didn't really see any votes that they did that I disagreed with. They pretty much voted the way I would have voted. So I think that makes it a kind of easy on me, actually. And I kind of get a little bit of a cheat code there by having those Freedom Caucus people around who have been there for a while and understand what's really going on, and can look at a bill that I might read and say, oh, well, this looks great. And then they tell me, oh, yeah, it does look great, but it's got this, this, and this in it. And those are bad. Oh, okay. I didn't see that. I'm going to seek other counsel.
That's something I've noticed. You're right. The bills aren't usually too long. Some of them are really long if they're changing words in a lot of different areas of code. But you can get the idea in just a couple pages. And I'll read something and think, oh, well, this sounds totally reasonable. And then I'll hear from someone else who says, wait a second, there's this poison pill in here that's going to cause this, and it's it's almost like you need a lawyer on retainer to just tell you what the bill actually means.
Yeah. Well, I learned this back when I was in California. We did Friends of NRA. My wife and I raised tons of money for the NRA back in the day. And I got to go to some of these little secret meetings where they told us what they were doing, because in that state, the NRA can't be a presence because it automatically gets dogpiled on by all the Democrat folks. So they would do things under the table and secretly. And for years, for over a decade, they had a guy in the Capitol who was one of the people who actually typed the bills up. And he would change one little word here or one little word there, and he would gut the entire bill by doing it. And he would just
Wow.
play dumb when he did it, right? But it would save the state from getting some bad gun legislation. So I learned back then that, one single word can matter. So you really have to be very careful when you read these bills and make sure that all the words make sense and that they've worded it correctly so it can't be twisted.
Yeah, which means you need to have a good relationship with legislative services so that you make sure that they, you know, type up something that reflects exactly what you mean for it to reflect.
Right.
It's a big job, and well, I'm glad to hear that you're interested in applying for it. Obviously, you have a three-way race, and I've heard people on, there's obviously kind of a divide in North Idaho. And I've heard from people on both sides, and honestly, I still don't quite understand it. From a distance, it seems like, there's a lot of people who are very similar on the issues, but they're, very much opposed to each other. How are you going to stand out in a three-way race and
Oh,
avoid split, and basically avoid splitting the vote and just allowing the incumbent to win again?
I stand out just fine. Anytime we get up on a stage and speak, I stand out just fine. In Boundary, when we did the forum in front of the Panhandle Republican women, there was no question of who stood out. I've never had that problem.
Well, if you have just a few minutes to,
I got time, man. This is my day off. I'll take as much time as you need to take.
well, I blocked off an hour, and then I've got a half hour to recharge and get ready for the next one. But before we go, I wanted to just cover a few of the issues and get your takes on them. You know, I'm sure you're going to be solid on guns. That's, you run a gun store. You're familiar with that field. But what about things like school choice? Over the last couple of years, there's been different proposals, for making money follow the child, whether a direct voucher or an education savings account. This year, they tried a tax credit, but that one didn't even get out of committee. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think would be the best way forward, and what kind of bill would you support?
Well, the best way forward is for the parents to be able to choose where their kids go and have whatever money would be assigned to that child at a public school be able to follow them wherever those parents want to send that kid. You know, I'm one of the classic examples of somebody who the public school system didn't work for. I was bored out of my mind in public school, and my parents sent me to private schools when they could afford to, but it wasn't all the time. Most of my time was in public schools. And if they had been able to take the money that is spent on the public school system and were able to move that over to a private system, then I think I would have had a better education. And I think these days that's even more important with the leftist agenda that's getting pushed in the schools. If a parent doesn't want their kid to be propagandized to by leftist teachers or leftist agenda, leftist school books, they should be able to pull the kid out of the school and send them to a Christian school or send them to a magnet school. They should be able to send them to a school that works for their child and is in line with their values. And these days, you can't do that because the school unions and the people that lobby for the school districts are so powerful. They really would like our money and they really don't want to give it up and they really don't want any competition. But we've got to figure out a way. You mentioned several ways that they've tried it in the past. Well, we just, like the leftists, we can't quit. We have to keep trying different methods, and we've got to maybe do some of their tactics where we do a little bit of incrementalism, where we just incrementally change one little bit of it and we just keep moving and changing a little bit at a time until the parents have some choice and until the money follows the kid. To me, this is a no-brainer because if you have a poor performing public school, they don't have any incentive to do better. I mean, they still get the money if the
Mhm.
kid's there. I
In
want to
fact, they
give them
usually
some.
get more money if they're failing.
Yeah, they give them more money. I want to give these schools some incentive. I want to take that money from them and say, you can't have this because you haven't performed well. And the parents are going to take it and put it in this school over here that is performing better for their kid. And I don't want to wreck the public schools, but I want to force them to do better. I want them to be proud that they're putting out excellent students and that 90% of the kids in the district go to their school because it's the best place for them to go. I mean, that would be awesome. I would love that. We would have, better scientists and better engineers and, they would turn out better students. But the way they're doing it now, I mean, I don't really see a lot of brilliant things coming out of our schools these days. We don't have standout people that I've seen coming out of these schools. It seems to be they seem to be turning out, workers or I don't know, peasants.
Or
And we
activists like that young man from Boise schools who is crashing politicians' speeches in the name of climate change.
yeah, I mean, this is just leftist propagandizing, and it should be a crime. I mean, you can't put an adult that has years of wisdom into a room full of kids with no wisdom and no background to fight these ideas and have them shoving these leftist ideas on these poor kids. I mean, they're basically just programming these poor kids, and it should be a crime.
So yeah, competition would help with that. And they would shape up. The public school supporters would say that, well, one, they need more money because they're underfunded. They always need more money. And also that
Yeah.
you already have local control at the school board level. But of course, there's the unions, as you said, there's the various NGOs and activist organizations that have gotten involved in the school system, supplying curricula and things like that. So it's a tough one to crack, but I think putting the money at stake would probably be the quickest way to make them shape up.
Right. It absolutely would be because that's all. I mean, at the heart of it, it seems to be all they care about. I mean, you don't get these school administrators going to schools for the love of education. No, they're going because they're getting paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it, 150, $250,000. That's why they're doing it.
Um, Looking at your own website, some of the other issues that are important, cheap labor. That was obviously a big debate this year. There were competing memorials, just essentially statements of the will of the legislature. One of them called for comprehensive immigration reform, bipartisan support, and guest worker and better visa system. And they took out the amnesty clause from last year, but it was still implicitly there because a report came out that same week that says that there are 35,000 illegal aliens employed in Idaho, and there's no call for repatriation or deportation or anything. So I think there was an implicit amnesty call there. And then on the other side, you had one calling for the impeachment of the president and enforce our existing laws. Uh, One of them passed, one of them failed. You can guess which one. And there's a lot of folks, especially from eastern Idaho and southwestern Idaho, who represent the interests of big agriculture companies who say that without either more visas or illegal immigration, we're not going to be able to afford our food. So how do you address that without they say it'll crash the economy if we deport all the illegal aliens. So how do you address that?
Well, I mean, the crops are going to get picked somehow. And I don't know, I'm not intimate with the books of these various companies, but I do know that the farms that are doing a lot of this complaining are gigantic farms. They're gigantic corporations. They're not ma and pa farms. These aren't family farms where the kids help pick the crops. These are gigantic corporations. And having worked with enough gigantic corporations, I know that normally when they're squeezing things, they're trying to squeeze because they feel this fiduciary duty to their stockholders to give them some kind of benefit from owning the stock. They're trying to give their stockholders a better dividend, and they feel like their fiduciary duty is to push that no matter what. And I think that's a large part of what's driving all this immigrant labor. They want the cheapest labor they can get to get the job done, so that they can return more stockholder dividends, and so that they can have a bigger house and buy a bigger yacht. But I think if they were paying a decent wage and maybe they had a smaller mansion and a smaller yacht, they could afford to pay people in Idaho. But that's not what they want. They want every last penny of profit out of those crops, and they want to pay as little as possible to get them out of the fields. But I don't know. This is where I kind of feel like a commie again. I don't feel like that's entirely necessary. I don't want to say power to the workers or something like that, but there has to be some sort of fair wage that a local Idaho resident, a citizen of the United States, would take and do these jobs. And there's going to have to be at some point we would reach some equilibrium. There would be a point where maybe we have half the people that are Idaho citizens doing the jobs, and maybe they bring in some guest workers and they come in and they They, pick a crop and they go home. They don't stay here. Um, but I don't know, that's kind of my thought on that.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly the mechanics of how we would do that, but it would be nice to have more people within the state, more citizens employed. I'm sure there are people who would do those jobs, but you have to pay them. And I just think the big companies don't want to pay them.
Well, that's you know, not to sound commie myself, but that's kind of the poison pill of unfettered capitalism in a world of open borders and free trade. In that, what's to stop a company from deciding, well, we can pay citizens $20 an hour, or we could pay, guest workers $15 an hour. Well, it's a simple choice. We'll just, employ all of them, and you guys can go find other jobs. And it really leads to kind of a, I don't know, balkanization of industries. Whenever these things were debated on the floor, people would get up and say, this is an attack on the agricultural industry or the hospitality industry because they rely on foreign labor. And I don't know, I feel like relying on foreign labor is not a good place to be for an American company.
And those are disingenuous statements that it's an attack on such and such industry. It's not an attack on that industry. It's an attack on the giant corporations in that industry, because the smaller, family farms and the smaller, individually owned hotels, I'm pretty sure that they're not dependent on that type of labor like the large ones are. And if the small guys can get away without having these immigrant labor pools, then that means the big ones can too. You know, when I've run companies, I've always paid workers well, because the best decision you can make as a manager is hiring a good employee. And the worst decision you can make as a manager is treating that good employee poorly. So we would hire good people, we would treat them well, we would pay them well, and they would do a good job for us, and we would have happy customers. But I think a lot of these large corporations, they're just so concerned about that bottom line that they don't see that, they've lost sight of that, I think. I mean, we all see it every day. Anytime you call some, go call Verizon or something. Pick a company. It doesn't have to be Verizon. Just any big company. And try call them and try and talk to a person. Try and get a problem solved. We see this every day in our lives, and it's all bottom line driven.
Yeah, because the outsourcing call centers to places where it's difficult to communicate, there's no direct effect on their revenue as far as they can see. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, right? So but it makes life really frustrating and really difficult at times.
Well, it's these are things that get implemented in these companies by I mean, it used to be that a CEO in a company might do 20 years at the company. And now you're lucky if you get 7 years of a CEO's time at one of these large companies, because they go in and they implement things like, Indian based call centers that make customers mad, and they hurt the company in the long term, but they get short term gains where they get to, put a few more bucks in their pocket or make the stock go up a little bit more. And they'll fire some employees to do that too. But these people that they're hiring to do these things aren't in it for the long term health of the company. They're in it to try and meet the goals of whatever contract they signed when they took the job. And it's unhealthy for these companies long term. I mean, look how many corporations that have been around forever that in the last 20, 30 years have imploded because they've done things like this. I mean, there's all kinds of them. I mean, look at GE. What did GE used to make? And what does GE make now? Its biggest thing now is GE Capital. Why is GE Capital their biggest thing now? Well, because it was the easiest thing for them to squeeze the most money out of. They could get more out of that than making jet engines or making appliances. So that's where the CEOs pushed them.
Hmm. It's interesting you talk about the difference between long-term and short-term incentives for CEOs. I feel that way about politics. You go in here, you're going to have 2 years at least, and then you have to come before the voters again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that creates incentives for the short term in the legislature. We can borrow money, at the federal level. We can implement things that'll give people an immediate gratification and therefore will get reelected, or we can, look at delayed gratification and investing in the long term, but then we'll just lose. So what's the point? It seems it has backwards incentives.
Well, maybe when you get elected, you try and do the best thing no matter what. Maybe that's a better choice to make. Maybe Sometimes the short-term stuff is a good idea. Usually not. Usually any decision made quickly is a bad one. But what we should be doing should have our grandchildren in mind. We should be passing something on in a better condition than it is when we took it over. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s. The world was getting better, and then something happened in the 90s, and I don't know if it was, I don't know what it was, but the world started going the other direction. The leftists started getting more in control, and the world started going downhill. We peaked sometime, I think, in, I don't know, mid late 80s, and we've been kind of going downhill ever since. And I would like to try and reverse that. I want us to turn over a better country to our kids and our grandkids than it is currently. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take looking ahead. And we're going to have to be able to explain this to our constituents that, this is long-term healthy, it's good for you. And if that means we got to have a bunch of town halls, great. I would be more than willing to sit in a town hall all day and explain this stuff to people, as long as the people will come and listen to it and take the time to understand what we're doing is what we think is for your own good. And if you think it's not, tell us what you would do differently, and let's have a conversation. But let's try and make it better.
Well, I think that's a great note to finish up on. Do you have any final thoughts, or let us know where people can find you and support you?
Yeah, Hutchings, number 4Idaho.com. Hutchings4Idaho.com is the website. We're still doing a fundraiser, giving away an AR. Go donate some money, and we'll put you in a drawing to win an AR. If you let me keep talking, I'll probably talk all day. So you should probably just cut me off and throw me out of here.